And we're basically done with the lettering of this engine. We'll just real quickly put there's just a little white square here that's the General Electric builder's plate. And as I did the logo here, this is such a small detail here. It's just part of the CSX logo, but it's the TM mark here and stuff. But a very important thing. This is probably one of the biggest things. It's a side note. I do this to myself, but is the top of the engine is white, as you can see, and I write just a note. You can erase this at the end, and I write to myself that the top is supposed to be white, and I write that so that when I start to paint the engine blue, sometimes when you'll start to notice this when you start to paint, that as you get going painting, there's a tendency to forget that that's supposed to be white. And once you paint that blue, you can't take the blue off. So it's really good to put a quick note that the top is supposed to be white. And even if you trim it out that it's supposed to be white, there's a tendency that you get so caught up in painting that you forget. And believe me, there have been many cabs I've painted blue. So if 5-10 times you paint the top blue, don't worry about it. It's just that a lot of practice and a lot of times that's why even on my own drawing, I'm labeling it that the cab should be white on the top. And you can erase that later. It's a lot easier to erase the top off than it is to go back and compensate. So now it's time to start painting. So as I've always said, it's easiest to do the light colors first. So let's start with the yellow. And luckily the paint breaks where CSX becomes yellow are basically in places where the locomotive has natural angles. So the nose has just basic natural angles on it. So, and the main thing you want to not paint over is there's a little cab window on the door, and then there's the side sill, which is yellow. And as we've said before in other videos, this is where the drawing really starts to get fun. And immediately right here is where you can see, oh my gosh, this is starting to look like a CSX engine. And we put the yellow on the back and a little bit of yellow on the rear light. And once we start to put the yellow on the CSX Tomorrow Moves logo, immediately to all of us, we start to say, oh, this is a CSX engine. And immediately, this is where all these hours of detail, you start to say to yourself, I know this railroad. This is a CSX engine. This looks like the engines that I've rail fanned in Cumberland and in Harper's Ferry and in Waycross and in Atlanta. It's like, I know that logo. I've seen that in Hamlet. It's like, yep. See, once you put that logo on and you color it, it really starts to stand out. And there's a little bit more yellow. I've seen that engine on the sandpatch grade. It's like, yep. The handrails are yellow. That's, again, as we like to say, it's for safety. And again, since the steps are going to be black, you can go a little bit over on these, because not on the actual handrail that sticks out. Try to keep those as tight as you can. But where it's going to be painted black you're going to trim over that with black. So it's a little bit forgiving there. And then the number needs to be yellow. And see, almost once you start to get the whole engine lettered, you can really start to imagine that this is going to be a CSX engine. And as I'm about ready to trim the blue on this engine, it will really take shape. And as you see, I often like to get the pins started on my little scrap of paper, because that way the pin has a much truer line to it. And see, right now, as you do start to trim, you really start to get involved in the process. That's why that white note that I put up and emphasized is really good. There's about 2 or 3 points in the drawing where it's really good. But you see, I trimmed around that, and writing white up there was a great reminder. And as we just sort of, I use a little bit the ballpoint around some of this, but I'm going to use actually a different pin around the CSX logo. It's more of an ink pen, and I recommend it. And ballpoint pens, all the pens I feel are good at what they do. Part of why I use a ballpoint, especially, I've used them a lot throughout, but right against these lines, the ink pens can smear a little bit, especially against the template. But here is one of the micron pens, and these, again, I'll start it over here. These, why I like to use these is they have a much thicker edge, first of all. And I know none of this is really super easy to see in a video, and these take quite a bit of practice, but not a whole lot. I recommend getting them pretty soon in your drawing career. Why I recommend using them when you go around things like the CSX logo is what happens. This is a little different than when we do things like when we were working on drawings such as the Florida East Coast engine. That was black on yellow. And black on yellow, when it's dark letters on a light background, it's just fairly crisp. But when it's light letters on a dark background, you need to go around the letters. As you can see, I'm trimming around these letters, a lot like the way I trim around paint breaks in general, because you have to go up to the edge of all these letters. And ballpoint pens don't quite go right to the edge the way these pens do. These pens go right up to the edge. And especially on things like a logo, you want to, as soon as you can in your practice, you want to be able to do your best to go right to the edge of logos, because that way the CSX logo, and I'll do the horn up here too with this pen. And when you use these pens on the CSX logo, when it's time to paint around it with the brush tip pen, you'll be able to go right up to the edges. And as you go right up to the edges, it makes, again, the CSX logo very crisp. That's why the pencil lines were important, to make the edges sharp. And then this pin makes it again so the CSX logo is as crisp as possible. And again, the number is the exact same way because the number and the letters are the exact same. They're both yellow on blue. And I could either use a ballpoint or this pin to go around the cab windows because I didn't go around them. It doesn't really matter. But the biggest thing about these kind of pins that I'll emphasize is that these pins you have to be a little bit more careful with. That's why I do use ballpoints a lot in these demonstrations, is that these pins, the tips do wear out very quickly if you don't use them in the exact right way, whereas ballpoint pins you can use again and again. So that's why I do a little bit recommend ballpoints for most of your trimming, because if you use this pin aggressively along the edges, the tip will wear out very quickly, and these pins are a little bit more expensive than ballpoint pins.